Hello, and welcome back to Curious Now from the Center for Medical Simulation. I'm Jenny Rudolph. This week, we're going to talk about how conversation drives culture. Although I'm going to be talking about some social science theories of this, it actually has shockingly real impacts on people at work. I learned this the first time as a research assistant working with John Carroll at the MIT Sloan School of Management. And John had engaged me to help him take a look at how nuclear power plants learned from accident and error. And the one that stuck with me to this day was one that we ended up calling fall from roof. And there's nothing that particularly nuclear about it. But what had happened is three workmen had been asked to change out a light bulb extremely high up in a hangar-like warehouse where materials were stored, not nuclear materials, but other equipment and so on for this nuclear power plant. They figured that the best way to do this would be to clamber up onto the roof of a little shed that was within this giant warehouse and stand on the roof and change it. The guy who clambered up there fell off and broke a bunch of bones and punctured his lung. That was my first exposure to how conversation shapes culture, because what the root cause analysis team took detailed notes on from their conversations with the workmen involved was that there had been no pre-job briefing because they said this was so simple, he's just going to climb up there and fix it. Second, there was no safety gear like a harness or a anchor set in any way to prevent him from falling because it was considered in their conversations, they had said, hey, this is going to be easy. You're going to like it. It's tight up there. And the implications was, this is something that anybody could do with ease. And if you were not a wimp, you would just climb up there and do it. The other thing was, in the dialogue, it came about that this was the newest guy on the team, and he had seen this as an opportunity to succeed and look good in front of his other colleagues. So I found this so fascinating. I was actually a rock climber at the time, so I was, of course, very aware of how do you get ready to get into a situation where you might fall. But I myself have been in many much more casual situations where, like, somebody wanted me to do something and I didn't want to seem like a wimp. And so I went ahead without really thinking it through or without talking it over or without pausing for a little huddle. So when we say conversation drives culture, this is what we mean. How we talk about doing a job shapes how we do the job. And it can have true implications for safety and wellness. So let's explore a little more.
What if building leadership and connection skills in real life was less about grand epiphanies and more about small, consistent reps? The way athletes train, the way musicians practice, the way simulation refines teaming and clinical performance. Push ups, sit ups, building up your cardio. We put challenges and weights in front of ourselves to get fit. We embrace no pain, no gain. Yet when we find something difficult in real life, especially an interpersonal something, we often skitter away. We put down the weight and walk away from the workout. Curious Now helps us lean into those everyday interactions, the awkward silences, simmering tensions, and high stakes conversations, and treat them like reps in a leadership gym. Curious Now, stronger later.
So let's talk about what we want you to be ready for this week. We would like you to be ready to use conversations as an engine of culture change. And we're going to start with inviting input. I'm going to get a little bit geeky here for a moment and remembering that I was an organizational behavior PhD student and I read a lot of sociology articles in my PhD training. But two theories really stuck with me, and that's part of the reason I'm talking with you about why conversation drives culture. One of them was called structuration theory by a guy named Anthony Giddens, and another was called the social construction of reality, popularized by Berger and Luckman. And what these two sets of theorists found that kind of blew my mind was that things that I thought were just there and not changeable, such as the culture in my PhD program or the unit culture of my boathouse where I was rowing, or organizations where I had worked in the summer as a student. I thought that was just there and there was nothing that you could do about it. But what these theorists of dynamic culture found was that every single conversation, whether it's a huddle, a formal debriefing, chatting in the kitchen of your unit, how we talk to each other, what we say, what we don't say, what we leave out, shapes what we expect of each other and the culture of our unit. So there are three phases to this that these guys thought of, and I found them kind of revolutionary. People create shared practices and expectations through conversation. Then we treat these expectations and these social norms and these rules like they're a real thing. And then, seeing them as a real thing, we allow them to constrain what we will say and don't say. But there's a lot of what we do every day that we co create unknowingly. So there've been a bunch of really important studies and interventions that use this theory of how conversation drives culture, how micro conversations are the molecules of culture to make a difference in organizations. So one of the people that has done the most with this is Amy Edmondson, a professor at Harvard Business School. And one of the things she found when she looked at how conversation shapes the adoption of new technology, for example, in the operating room, was that when the leader of the team, in this case that she was studying, a surgeon implementing minimally invasive cardiac surgery, invited people to share their perspectives, invited them to speak up, invited them to let him or her know what was happening in the operating room, those teams were able to shift from doing cardiac surgery with an open chest where everything could be seen to minimally invasive where you couldn't see the field as well. The only person who could see the interior of the body was the person operating, and where interdependence went up hugely because of not everybody being able to see into the patient's chest. So what was fascinating there was she found they were able to, of the groups who were able to speak up more to each other, learn the new technology more quickly, and make progress with it. So it's not only that it felt different in those ORs, it felt more psychologically safe, warmer, people's perspectives were regarded and taken in, but it had an impact on the adoption of this new important technology, which led to much lower recovery times for patients. So again, if we're thinking about how does conversation drive culture, another area that this has made a huge difference in is the research of Ingrid Nembard, who was a student of Amy Edmondson's actually, and her important study was called Making It Safe. And it focused on what she ended up calling leader inclusiveness behaviors. That not very catchy term refers to what do leaders do to invite people's input in crucial situations. And again, lest you think this is just a nice thing to do, let me talk about the fact that the place where I've worked for the last 15 plus years, the Center for Medical Simulation, has partnered with the Crico Risk Management Foundation, which is the captive insurer of the Harvard Teaching Hospital system. And what Crico found in analyzing malpractice insurance claims, and that was their job, is to provide insurance for physicians across the system, was that a significant proportion of claims came from a specific kind of communication breakdown. And that communication breakdown was somebody in the room knew something was wrong and didn't speak up, didn't say anything about it. So they've contracted with us over the last many years, more than a decade, to help create cultures within the OR where people feel safe to speak up and where leaders feel safe to invite input. So let me just take this all down to a really concrete, specific, small feedback loop that we all have some control over. Every time I invite somebody's input in a conversation and then I thank them for sharing it, that is a micro conversation. That is a molecule that starts contributing to a culture of collaborative inquiry, openness, and sharing. And in turn, that culture, that set of expectations shapes how my conversation partners will act in the next conversation. So when I invite input, it's a leadership moment. I'm shaping the culture such that the next time that culture is going to make it easier for them to speak up. But it's all not sun and roses here because that same reinforcing loop I just described can also be a vicious cycle. So if I'm in a situation where somebody does speak up and I say, hey, if I want your opinion, I'm going to tell you, or did I ask for your opinion? That in turn shapes a culture of more silencing and indirectness. And those expectations and that culture of silencing and indirectness then reinforces and suppresses speaking up, for example, the next time. Another example, because leader inclusiveness is so important, leaders inviting input is so important. Let's say I invite input as a leader. I'm a young staff member. I'm new to a service. And somebody humiliates me for asking for input. Again, we're shaping a culture of silencing and not seeking support, which might shape my ability to ask for input next time. So, how conversation shapes culture can be a virtuous cycle, and we are the core. We are the leaders in those little moments that are driving culture to make it better, or we're driving culture to maintain the status quo of silencing and indirectness. James, I think you should cut out the middle thing I
Yep.
said there because I already said it.
The last thing you said there was reminding me of you're not in traffic, you are traffic. You're not in the culture, you are the culture.
I love that. You may remember last week, we asked you to just think about, what might I be missing? So I'm thinking about the world a specific way. I have frames that make me see things and ignore others. And we asked you to kind of minimize your blind spots to some degree by asking yourself, what might I be missing? So this week, we'd like to pivot that to the external world. And so, in any situations that you're in where you have a strong point of view, you could be like, hey, I think the 3 criteria we need to hire this new person are A, B, and C. And you could still say at the end of that, but I might be missing something. What am I missing? Or you might be taking care of a patient in a certain context, and you might say, hey, I think this person has diagnosis X, and I think we need to treat with Y and Z. But am I missing anything? Does anybody see this differently? And when I ask for input, it doesn't mean I have to follow it. It doesn't mean I have to agree with it. But when the person gives you the input, it starts creating a culture of more openness and collaboration. And the correct answer to somebody's input is thank you, whether you agree with it or not, and then you can let people know what you're planning to do. Whether you'll use it or not is not the most important thing here.